Welcome everybody. On behalf of Foundation for India and Indian Diaspora Studies, we have this event today on India's foreign policy 2.0 in this new multipolar world. And we are fortunate to have Ambassador Kanwal Sibalji. Before I invite Ambassador, let me give quick introduction of Foundation for Indian Diaspora Studies.
FIIDS, or Foundation for India and Indian Diaspora Studies, is a nonprofit organization with a mission to create awareness and provide advocacy on issues, events, and matters related to India and Indian diaspora, with factual research conducted by scholars and experts. It is an institute for research, analysis, awareness, and advocacy on events, issues, and matters related to India and Indian diaspora. FIIDS engages dialogues of international leaders and policymakers on India, international affairs, and Indo-US relations. It also conducts policy studies, surveys, analysis, conferences, and publications for strategic awareness and education on policy matters to international leadership, policymakers, media, and masses. FIIDS has successfully hosted conferences on various topics ranging from international relations, trade, terrorism, Kashmir, human rights, and India diaspora. FIIDS engaged experts, elected officials, and officials in external ministries. It works on international relations like Indo-US relations, Indo-China relations, Indo-Israel relations, and Indo-Afghan relations. It has also hosted many international leaders, such as India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, India's ex-Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, State Minister Jayant Sinha, India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, as well as Congressman Ed Royce, Congressman Joe Crowley, and Congressman Elliot Engel. FIIDS has conducted surveys on Indo-American youths on their identity, US elections, NRI policies of government of India, and opinions on Indo-Americans on policies and elections in the United States. FIIDS has published policy papers on India's Kashmir, CAA, plight of the Yazidis, and Indo-China conflicts. FIIDS is also engaged in various issues like incidents of intolerances against Indo-Americans, immigration policies related to Indo-American technologists, and improper projections of Indic traditions and religions in the US media. FIIDS experts also keep watch on international terrorism and the situation in South China Sea. Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, Ambassador Virendra Gupta, Professor Vijay Kaul, Professor Shanti Shri, and Captain Alok Bansal are part of FIIDS Experts Board. Professor Yash Pathak and Professor Vedananda are members of the Board of Advisors.
So good morning, everybody. Once again, thanks and welcome to FIIDS event on occasion of India's 75th independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. In this occasion, we have launched Reimagining India series, how we look forward India from moving forward. Our first talk was by Ambassador, Honorary Minister Nitin Gadkari ji. It was last month, and it was on India's infrastructure. Today, we are fortunate to have Ambassador Kanwal Sibalji on India's foreign policy in this multipolar world. It's very important topic, as we know that today itself, India's Prime Minister and United Kingdom's Prime Minister Boris Johnson had a meeting. Similarly, if you look at the last whole month, there is always some dignitaries visiting India and having the meetings. Last week, Prime Minister Modi ji and President Biden had virtual summit ahead of 2+2 dialogues. There was also a call between Prime Minister Modi ji and Australian Prime Minister. There was a visit by Prime Minister of Japan. So you can see that it has been very hectic. That also shows that rising importance of India on this world. And on this occasion, India really, the whole world is very curious and very much interested in India's policy moving forward. That's why this topic is very important. And we wouldn't have any other better experts than Ambassador Kanwal Sibalji on this one. He has been one of the most well-known Foreign Secretary of India. He has been ambassador to Russia. He has been ambassador to France, Egypt. He was also DCM in USA. So he has experience in dealing with all these superpowers. His views are very much important and very keenly observed and heard. He has been awarded Padma Shri Award by Government of India in 2017. With this, I would like to welcome Ambassador Kanwal Sibal.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and the topic you've chosen is very pertinent. I think we have serious challenges ahead in terms of shaping our foreign policy in a way that is well adjusted to the changes that are taking place on the international scene currently. You know, as a matter of fact, a new world order is currently being shaped. And this is being triggered by the Ukraine conflict. The Ukraine conflict has, in fact, taken on a dimension which was almost unimaginable until a few weeks ago. Earlier on, there was a suspicion that we were heading towards a new Cold War, but there was also a feeling that it wasn't the same kind of a Cold War as in the past, and that it lacked some of the basics that divided the Western world and the Eastern world led by Russia or led by the Soviet Union. But the fact is that a new Cold War has already emerged, and it is much more dangerous than the earlier version. I would say that West has taken a huge risk in confronting Russia in the way that they are doing. And we would be fortunate if we escape moving headlong into a wider conflict. Now, as you know, President Biden himself, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Blinken, and others are making no secret of the fact that what they want to do is a regime change in Russia. They want to isolate Russia, they want to weaken Russia, and they want to topple Putin. Now, these are the policies that the United States had pursued after the demise of the Soviet Union, when Fukuyama said it was the end of history, and we saw the phase of unilateralism, of US unilateralism. It ended badly. The Iraq war ended badly. The Afghan war now has ended badly. The Libyan war ended badly. Syrian war has also not ended well. The Islamic State emerged as a result of the mistakes that were committed. There were huge refugees flows from West Asia into Turkey and then on into Europe. Millions were displaced internally. And of course, all the Arab Spring policies and this and that, as you are well aware, which were motivated by a desire to change the map of West Asia, did not end in the way that had been imagined. Now we are entering into a new phase of unilateralism. where United States and Europe have got together, and they are taking certain decisions at the international level, which are unilateral in the way they have been taken without UN approval. We were all very concerned that multilateralism was dead when Trump was in power, because he had no faith in either the UN or NATO. He walked out of the climate change negotiations. He walked out of UNESCO. He did so many things which created a lot of stir among thinking people that multilateralism was dead, and the challenge was to revive multilateralism. As you know, the 75th session of the United Nations was devoted to revival of multilateralism. But today, multilateralism is gone, in the sense that such drastic decisions have been taken at the international level by United States and Europe, which to begin with, have finished the whole concept of globalization. Globalization meant, as you well know, interdependence, functioning supply chains, rise in levels of prosperity everywhere, free trade, connectivity, institutions, global institutions that were drawing up rules which were expected to be followed by all countries. Not that they always were, but still there was a mechanism that was functioning well or not so well. But now what you see is that decisions have been taken which are totally contrary to what has been constructed so painfully over the last decades, which resulted in the prosperity of many countries, including India, also benefited from this globalization. Now, as you know, in the United Nations Security Council, in UNGA or UN Human Rights Commission, it is a political battle. It is actually trying to corner Russia, condemn Russia, shame Russia. Russia, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has been expelled from the UN Human Rights Council, to which it was elected by the UN General Assembly. There has also been loose talk, not that it's going to happen, of expelling Russia even from the UN Security Council, of even expelling it from the IMF. But leave that aside. In effect, we were always criticizing how Pakistan had violated the WTO rules by denying India MFN status. Now, United States, Europe, Japan, and others have withdrawn MFN status to Russia. And there is also talk of expelling Russia from the WTO. What is even more, to my mind, almost unimaginable, that the head of state, the head of government, the foreign minister, the parliamentarians of Russia have been sanctioned. And Russia has in turn sanctioned Biden and Blinken and Sullivan and members of the Senate and members of the Congress and businessmen, just as Russian oligarchs have been sanctioned. So properties have been confiscated without due process of law. As you know, the UK was home not only for people who were running away with their wealth, ill-gotten wealth from India to UK, but the Russians went in very large numbers and were welcomed with open arms. And today the same oligarchs who brought in so much wealth to the UK find themselves being hounded and their wealth is being confiscated. There'll be a lot of lawsuits in the offing, because there is no law which allows the UK as a country which prides itself for the rule of law to confiscate private properties. What is even more worrisome, and all this, what I'm saying, has lessons from India going ahead. What is even more worrisome is the foreign exchange reserves that Russia had. Half of that, $300 billion, have been frozen by the United States. And the United States is threatening that they will use those funds for the reconstruction of Ukraine. It is plain downright robbery. I mean, all countries, including India, have invested in US treasuries. And who has given the authority? It's a contract. Who has given the authority under which contract for these reserves to be just appropriated or frozen? Russia has been expelled from SWIFT, which is a private company. It is a private company, not a government organization. But they have been forced to expel Russia from SWIFT, which means that payment mechanisms cannot work. And since Russia has been sanctioned, you can't pay Russia in dollars or in euros. This is creating a huge problem for countries even like India, how to make payments to Russia for our ongoing cooperation. Forget about expanding our cooperation, but even our existing cooperation. How do we support it in terms of payments? And then the United States, Dalip Singh, the Deputy National Security Advisor, came to India and said that India should not go in for rupee-ruble arrangements and should not bypass the dollar because there would be consequences. And leader after leader in the United States and in Europe has been telling us to reduce our oil dependence on Russia. Now, I suppose you know that India imports 4.31 or 33 million barrels per day. In 2021, we imported from Russia 16 million barrels, which is less than 4 days consumption. And the United States is saying that you should limit your imports of oil from Russia to what was in the past. That means only 4 days. So if you double it or triple it, if you make it 12 days, they are unhappy. In fact, our foreign minister, while during the 2+2 dialogue in Washington, as you must have followed, in response to a question, said that what India imports in a month, Europe imports in one single afternoon. Europe is actually pumping in $1 billion a day into the Russian treasury because of his oil and gas imports from Russia. So if there's a talk of fueling Putin's war machine, who's doing it? Not India, by buying a little bit of oil here and there. We have to pay for now, every $1 increase in the price of oil adds $500 million to our import bill. Therefore, if we can get discounted Russian oil at 30% discount, we should take it. It is in our national interest. As it is, because of COVID and everything else, our economy, not only ours, but the economy of so many countries was subject to serious strains. And our fiscal deficit has increased because we have to pump in a lot of money to support our population and our industry, especially the small and medium enterprises, and generally ensure that people have the basics available to them. So we need fiscal room for ourselves, and whatever we can do in terms of buying oil at cheaper prices, we should go ahead and do it. It is in our national interest. Anyway, coming back to the Ukraine whole thing, as you know, I mentioned in passing what the United States had done during the phase of unilateralism, these color revolutions and everything else, which were indirectly directed at Russia. In Ukraine especially, the view was that if Ukraine could be made into an attractive, functioning, prosperous democracy, it will then act as a kind of an example for the Russian public to follow. And in that process, like it happened in the Arab world during the Arab Spring, there would be a rise of the populace against the Putin administration, and he would be ousted. But now, of course, there is now a direct talk about ousting Putin from power. Now, what I want to say in sum is that the existing world order, which was created by the United States primarily ever since 1945, to subserve its national interest, is now in the process of being destroyed by the United States itself. We have been criticizing China for weaponizing critical supply chains with critical raw materials. But what the United States has done is to weaponize finance, weaponize the hegemony of the US dollar, and weaponize the existing international order which it controls. And the repercussions of that, Russia will naturally feel, but the rest of the world is feeling too, whether it's the rise in oil prices or shortage of food, especially as Russia and Ukraine are the biggest exporters of wheat. About 30% of the world's exports of wheat grain come from these two countries. There's already problems in Egypt and certain Middle East countries and in Africa. Fertilizer prices are going up. The commodity prices have risen enormously. If you look at the price of nickel, which is very essential for your electrical vehicles and batteries and all that, they have shot up. And this will go on because the Ukraine conflict is not going to end tomorrow. It's going to be prolonged. The other lesson that we should learn from all this, and you just mentioned India in a multipolar world. Now, where is multipolarity? India, in fact, in that phase of US unilateralism, tried to build up or promote a multipolar system along with a country like France, which was very vocal about the need for a multipolar world. And it is that line of thinking that resulted in the Russia-India-China dialogue, which was started when I was ambassador to Russia. It was that thinking that resulted in BRICS or BRIC, and that also happened when I was ambassador to Russia. South Africa was added later on and became BRICS. It is in my time that we began talking about our SCO membership, which China was obstructing until Pakistan was also admitted simultaneously. But now both of us are members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And here, and in my time also, we started IBSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. Again, this global South coming together and finding ways and means of cooperating each other without the mediation or intermediary role of the West. Now, all those projects are in the doldrums. And it's not only because of the Ukraine conflict that they are in the doldrums, it's also because our own relationship with China has deteriorated very rapidly, especially after the Galwan crisis and the massing of 50,000 Chinese troops on our border and an equal number on our side. And the very slow progress that is being made in disengagement, which has not been completed. After that, there'll be the process of de-escalation. And then eventually, the troops on both sides are supposed to move to their peacetime stations. This is not going to happen tomorrow. So India is caught in a jam. That on the one hand, the United States and Europe are taking decisions which are destroying the existing global order, and the sanctions are hurting us. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not hurting us. It is the sanctions that have been imposed by the United States and especially and Europe which are hurting us. So we are cornered there because we are under pressure to conform. We resist. And when we resist, there is a barrage of criticism, especially in the press and at leadership level in the United States in particular, that India has not condemned Russia, that India is sitting, that India as a democracy should side with democracy, that India has the moral obligation to side with the democracies. Now on this, I have a couple of points to make. One is that the Ukraine conflict didn't start with Russia's invasion on February 24. There's a whole history behind it. And that history is the relentless expansion of NATO. When I was ambassador in Russia, Putin went to the Munich Security Conference in 2007, protested very strongly against the expansion of NATO, and warned against the expansion of NATO to Georgia and Ukraine. After that, there were 4 more expansions of NATO. All the warnings were unheeded. In 2008, after Georgia was promised membership of NATO, Saakashvili, who was the president then, thought that he had US backing and provoked Russia. With the result that Russia took military action against Georgia and recognized the independence of 2 separatist republics there, South Ossetia and one more. This was a red line which Russia drew. The warning should have been actually heeded, but they went on. And in 2014, with the encouragement of the United States, the legitimately elected government of Ukraine, Yanukovych, was ousted through street demonstrations, openly supported by the United States. And as a result, Russia did what it did in Georgia by annexing Crimea. Following which, India, Russia and Ukraine agreed to the Minsk agreements, which were ratified by the UN Security Council, which were, to my mind, actually very obviously sensible, which contain some basic, which had some basic provisions, which is that they would, that some degree of autonomy would be granted to these 2 Luhansk and Donetsk republics, which are Russian-speaking and ethnically Russian, and that elections would be held after the Ukrainian constitution was amended to grant them autonomy, following which the Russian troops will withdraw and the area and the borders of Ukraine will be handed over to the Ukrainian forces. But this was never implemented, and largely, despite the fact that Germany and France were pushing for it, because the United States stood in the way. And the Ukrainian nationalist government did not want to make these concessions. This is the background of what has happened on February 24. Now, therefore, if India is to condemn Russia, then should we completely overlook all the years of provocation that went? And if we were to criticize both sides, how would it help our democracy? We will annoy both sides. But we can't take a partisan position and just close our eyes to actually the history of the whole thing and take a one-sided position. And supposing we did that, supposing theoretically we did that, and we, in the repeated resolutions in the UN, we voted against Russia and condemned Russia, what will be the result? Alienation of Russia. 60 to 70% of our defense platforms are Russian. We need servicing, we need spare parts. We need upgrades. If Russia just starts squeezing us, what will happen? With the Chinese sitting on a border, what will happen? We will have virtually no defense left. So we have to be extremely careful that we don't alienate Russia unnecessarily. Russia has never harmed us. Russia has never sanctioned us. They may be wrong in invading Ukraine, but that is a European problem. It is not India's problem. And insofar as democracy is concerned, I have been asking this question, please tell us where the West ever made concessions to India against its own thinking and interests because India is a democracy. All these years, China has been built up, where India also is an Asian power as a neighbor of China. But who's built up China? United States and Japan and Europe. But they didn't help India's rise, although we were a democracy. Going further back, we were a democracy, Pakistan was not. Under military rule, they became members of US-led alliances. They chose Pakistan over us. They chose on Kashmir, they've always troubled us. On human rights, they've always criticized us. On terrorism, until lately, when they have been more open in support, they have not targeted Pakistan. They have targeted Iran like anything, but not Pakistan. They've handed over Afghanistan to the Taliban without regard to our security interests. What Pakistan wanted all these years, which is strategic depth in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, they've got it. And who has given it to them? The United States and the UK, without any regard to Indian democracy. So this democracy argument is just not valid. Likewise, the morality argument now, was Iraq war on total falsehood? Was it moral? Was Libya moral? Was Syria moral? Was the destruction of Yugoslavia moral? So these are just ways to browbeat us and put us on the defensive. It is not in our interest to enter into polemics with the United States and Europe. It is not in our interest. We are not in that business. And what will we gain out of it? We don't want to get into this debate. What we really want is, please be sensible, be rational. You understand what our interests are, what our compulsions are, and accommodate us. We are not asking for anything else. If we do anything with Russia, it does not damage US security at all. But if US presses us to take a position against Russia, it directly harms our security. We are an Asian country. We have to be very watchful of our equities in Asia. And Asia today is dominated by China and Russia. The whole Central Asia is divided between them. So we have to make sure that Russia continues to have stakes in its relations with India so that we are not excluded from the Asian landmass. Now, the challenge before us is that, as a matter of fact, our relations with the United States are much more wide-ranging, far more important in size and scope than they are with Russia. This is a fact. Our trade with the United States is $160 billion. 200,000 Indian students are in the United States, 4 to 5 million diaspora. All the knowledge economy of India, our IT sector is tied to the United States. We also now have a developing defense ties relationship with the United States. They have supplied us certain platforms like the PI-8, maritime surveillance aircraft, which are very vital for maritime security. We have these Malabar exercises, which now both Japan and Australia have joined. We are together in terms of the Indo-Pacific concept and the Quad. In the recent 2+2 meeting, we agreed that Quad was for the public good. India is now committed to the Quad. So we can't turn our back on the United States, because that is a growing relationship. It will expand further. The trend lines are very positive. As compared to that, our trade ties with Russia are less than $10 billion. They're just 15,000 students. There's no diaspora. The range of ties is very limited. But the argument is not this. The argument is that our relations with each country depends on the merits of that relationship. And it is based on fulfilling certain specific needs. Our relationship with the United States fulfills a much wider much wider base of needs of India. Whereas with Russia, it is a narrower base, but these are specific and vital needs. There's no clash between the two. And this either or business doesn't work, especially with a country like India. Now, just a few more points and then I will end. One is that now what we see coming in the future is a difficult situation for everyone, including India, because two poles are developing and will develop. One is the Western pole, the other is the China-Russia pole. Now, India is in a happy position of having a foot in each poles. With the United States, we have a stronger relationship. With Russia and China, we have platforms on which we are together, like, as I mentioned, Russia, India, China dialogue, BRICS, SCO. Even though our relationship with China is in great difficulty, yet our trade ties with China have grown despite the confrontation on the border. Last year, our trade was $125 billion, which is not very far from the total trade with the United States. So now Russia and China are working on their independent payment systems. They have their own version of SWIFTs. We can't make these payments to Russia because of sanctions. So what will ultimately happen? Do we then adjust ourselves in terms of using the payment mechanisms outside the dollar system? Russia does not want to be paid for oil supplies in dollars, so we'll have to pay them either through the rupee ruble arrangement. But in any case, it will be outside the dollar system. So going down the road, there will be tensions, and India will be caught in between the two systems that are developing, and we cannot choose either or because our interests span both these potential systems, and we'll be under pressure, as usual, to choose. So we'll have no choice but to stand our ground and see how we manage to navigate this very difficult situation. The ultimate answer lies in Atmanirbharta, frankly. But Atmanirbharta is not a total solution. No country can be fully self-reliant. But to the extent that in certain vital areas, we have some degree of autonomy, it will give us the confidence and the margin for maneuver to follow our national interest. Otherwise, we'll become like a Japan or Germany. We may grow economically, but we'll have no independence in terms of decision-making. Look at the manner in which Germany has been humiliated, the third largest economy in the world. And they've done exactly what the Americans wanted to do then, including this pipeline with $10 billion was spent on developing it. And Biden said, I'm going to end this pipeline, and he has ended it. This is not the future that we see for ourselves. We want to be a pole in a multipolar world. After all, we have 1.3 billion people, a few thousand-year-old civilization. Our contribution to humanity has been immense. We have great human potential. We have a future. We have self-confidence. We have a leadership that is now looking ahead and making India count on the global stage. And as was mentioned, so many leaders are now coming to India because we already are the 6th largest economy. And even the IMF and the OECD, if you look at the reports, they're saying by 2050, we'll be 2nd largest economy in the world. China, India, United States. This is what the projection is. So things are going for us, and we should have self-confidence and pursue our national interests in a sober way and be friendly with all sides and not give up our friendships because one side wants to impose its choices on us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kanwal Sibalji. It was a very comprehensive presentation. Before I invite Yogi Chug, our policy expert, for the question answer, I just want to acknowledge a few of the presence in the audience. We have Ambassador Virendra Gupta. We have Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. We have Professor Baltej Singh Mang. We have Dr. Sampat Shivangi, Dr. Ramesh Jhapra. We also have from Poland joining Daud Jia. He's from Afghanistan. He's expert on Afghanistan. And we have also from World Bank, Rajendra Singh ji. With that, I will hand over to Yogi Chug.
Khanderao, thank you very much. Ambassador Sibal, remarkable conversation. You have certainly been an extraordinary diplomat for India. You are an influencer, a thinker. When you talk, people listen. So thank you so much for being here today with us and putting in perspective the very notion of India's position in the multipolar geopolitical hogwash that we have currently right now in front of us. I'm going to ask each of our participants to put your questions in the chat session, and we're certainly going to engage in that conversation. We have roughly about 20-25 minutes in order for us to allow this conversation to come to a point. Certainly, Ambassador Sibal's on India time, and certainly has been very generous by his time by being available today. Sir, I'm going to now ask Ambassador Virendra Gupta to just really come back and just pose a couple of questions in the context of this conversation, followed by Ambassador Pradeep Kumar as well. So Ambassador Virendra Gupta ji, you have a few minutes to raise your question for the audience and for Ambassador Sibal as well.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. And, you know, what I'd like to know is how will this all pan out in the future in terms of post this, conclusion of the Ukraine-Russia war? What happens thereafter on the global stage and vis-a-vis India in particular?
Well,
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
very
And I
difficult.
enjoyed your discussion very much, sir.
Thank you very much. It's very difficult to say. Frankly, if you ask me, I'm very puzzled by what the West, especially the United States, is doing, because I'm not very clear as to what their end game is. On the one hand, they say that they have no obligation to Ukraine because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. They will not put their boots on the ground. They will not want a direct conflict with Russia. At the same time, they are announcing millions of dollars of additional weaponry to Ukraine and pumping in more and more weapons, not only them, but Poland, the Baltic states, Italy, France, even though in a more subdued manner, Spain, and Germany especially, which resisted to begin with, but now has yielded under US and European pressure. So is it that they think that Russia will be defeated? The narrative is, if you listen to the Americans, they say that Russia didn't anticipate such a fierce resistance, and that now there is a combat between the Russian army and a citizens' army of Ukraine, which will prevail. And Russia has suffered 20,000 casualties. It has not been able to achieve its objectives. So Putin is in dire straits. Now, even for a moment, if we accept that Russia is in trouble, it has not been able to achieve its goals as quickly as possible, but Russia is not going to be defeated. See, between not being able to achieve your goals and being defeated, there is a huge space. And what will be the end result? End result will be more and more destruction of Ukraine. Its military infrastructure, its industrial infrastructure will be destroyed, as well as civilian casualties. So some are arguing that the US Western policy seems to be to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. Now, what will this lead up to? And at the same time, if you've noticed that Russia is sending signals, and dangerous signals, that if you have the ambition to how should I say, corner us so much that we have no defenses left, then we will show you what our defenses are. And they have just launched their Sarmat missile as a demonstration of their willingness to use the ultimate weapon if their existence is threatened. Now, is it rational, I ask you, is it rational for decision makers in the West to unwittingly move towards a potential world war? Well, Russia is not Iran, Russia is not Cuba, Russia is not Venezuela. It's the biggest country in the world. It can't be effaced from the map of the world. And sanctions against these smaller countries even Cuba haven't succeeded. They're not going to succeed against Russia. At the end of the day, Europe has to deal with Russia, the West has to deal with Russia. And the more Russia and China get together, the more difficult it would be to manage the post-Ukraine world, because the world will be actually divided in a, actually it's very ironical that during the Cold War, US and China were together against Russia. And the new Cold War, Russia and China will be against the United States. So there it is. I'm afraid I have no clear vision, and neither do I think the West has any clear vision. They only hopes that somehow Russia will crumble, which it won't.
Great, thank you. Ambassador Virender Gupta, do you have a question as well? Keeping the comments in the interest of time to the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would first like to compliment Ambassador Sibal for a very comprehensive presentation. And he's put very succinctly India's place in the evolving global geopolitical scene. The question that I have for you, sir, is as I see it, the conflict is not going to end very soon. As it prolongs and as it begins to hurt more and more economically, the European nations, do you see any likelihood of European nations beginning to see that that the war would be hurting them, and a fissure developing between them and America? Because after all, if you look at it, in Ukraine, the countries which are most active, America, Canada, UK, they are all distanced from the theater of the conflict. The countries in Europe are going to be more closely affected and impacted upon. So are they going to basically begin to look at the broader game that America is playing, sir?
I agree with you. I think you analyze it quite well. I anticipate fissures developing between US and the European Union. Currently, because of this media management and information war, which is extremely well organized and very effective, there is a lot of pressure from social media and from the public on the governments to give more and more support to Ukraine and take it up as their cause, as a cause for democracy, rules-based order, and all the shibboleths that we've been hearing for so long from the West. To the extent that if you see what is happening in Germany, that Ukraine is giving moral lessons to Germany, and Scholz is being cornered and progressively is being made to yield ground because of the shaming that Zelensky is subjecting Scholz and Germany to. On the other hand, we all know, and you know as well, that the Europeans have always chafed under US domination. They have accepted it for various reasons, but they have chafed. And there's been an effort by Germany and France and UK, when UK was still part of the European Union, to develop an independent European defense and security policy, and defense and foreign policy. Now that, of course, UK is out, that part of the project is over. But nevertheless, Germany and France have always tried to develop that kind of strategic autonomy. Which European country actually talks the same language as us in terms of strategic autonomy? It is France. In fact, we borrowed the phrase strategic autonomy from the French. This was de Gaulle's idea of strategic autonomy. So those things are there. What is happening today, as you well know, is that Poland and the Baltic states, they are the drivers of Europe's policy towards Russia. And this is the new Europe, which even during the unilateralism phase of the United States counted on them to control the old Europe during the Iraq War, as you remember. Now, this has come back with a bang. And these are the people who are leading, these countries are leading from the front, and the United States is instrumentalizing them in order to keep the rest in line, the rest of the Europeans in line. And you've seen how much now the United States military industrial complex is benefiting. I mean, Germany, at one time, France and Germany were together in terms of developing a new fighter and this and that and that. And now Germany is going to buy F-35s. So this increase in the defense budgets of Europeans and all is going to benefit whom? Is going to benefit very largely the United States of America. Now, what the whole issue of the Nord Stream 2? Even Trump, if you remember, was very vocal on this, that he didn't want the Nord Stream 2 to materialize because he wanted to sell US gas to Europe. And finally, they've succeeded in that. At whose cost? Because it'll be far more expensive than piped gas coming from Russia at much cheaper rates. So Europe will pay the price. And Europe is not doing very well economically. And there'll now be additional pressures on them. So I agree with you that sooner rather than later, you will see fissures developing within Europe, within the European public opinion, as to why the hell are they sacrificing their own welfare and well-being for the cause of Ukraine, and why can't a negotiated solution be found? And finally, the refugee question. If there are 3-4 million refugees already in Poland and elsewhere, it's going to cause immense strains, social strains in Europe.
Thank you, Ambassador Sibal. The next question will go to Professor Baldev Singh Maan. He's an academic at San Jose State University here in Silicon Valley. Dr. Maan, please go ahead. Let's see.
Jogi ji, could you please, because my internet is weak, please read out my question, which I have sent to you.
Sure, absolutely can do that. Professor Maan, thank you. Ambassador Sibal, the question from Professor Maan is that from your talk, he understands that India has a bad and worse option to pick from. I know you alluded to that a little bit, but could you respond to that? And I'll probably add to that question as well. Do you see under any circumstances India taking a role as a peacemaker?
Well, you know, our Prime Minister has been making this point, and I think very intelligently, to deflect pressure on India by himself taking the initiative, as he has done during Johnson's visit, by himself raising the Ukraine issue, as he did with President Biden in his virtual meeting a few days ago, where he began by saying that he's spoken to Zelensky, he's spoken to Putin, and he's pressed both of them to talk to each other and resolve the conflict, find a peaceful solution, that India is in favor of that. India wants understand the humanitarian situation. He condemned the Bucha killings, but you know, the whole condemnation has been totally misunderstood. Actually, if you see what he said, is very astutely worded. Of course, the killings are condemnable, but he didn't say Russia is responsible. He said there should be an independent probe, which means that India is not going to buy the US version or the Ukrainian version. Frankly, if the Bucha killing occurred, why couldn't they be investigated immediately by the United Nations? After all, 5 prime ministers of Europe traveled by train to meet Zelensky, and Johnson went to meet Zelensky by train, which means you can go on the spot and do investigation. But without any investigation, they said, no, Russian forces are responsible, war crimes have been committed. This is a narrative that has been created. So in other words, to come back to the question, that India is playing its cards well. Without condemning either side, it is expressing the right views on how the conflict should be dealt with and managed, and a peaceful solution found. That is one. I don't think India can do more than that. If Biden and Sullivan and Blinken and others openly say they want a regime change in Russia, this is not something that we can support. It's not in our interest. Why do we want a regime change in Russia? And how can we buy that agenda? And if both sides at the highest level have been sanctioning each other, so what do we do? There's no point in taking a role when you know that at least one side is absolutely not interested in a negotiated solution for the time being. Russia is proposing a negotiated solution, but the West is not interested because they see a golden chance to topple Putin. But see, at one time, if you remember, during the days of nuclear weapons and all that, India and Olof Palme and a couple of other leaders got together and tried to fashion the international discourse on these sensitive issues. Today, there is no leader. Yes, India could join 2 or 3 or 4 global leaders, one from Europe, one from Latin America, one from Africa, and see if they can play a role. But there is no such leader. And India should not take the risk of overextending itself and being subject itself to a diplomatic reverse and a defeat. and just expose its own helplessness and annoy, and in the process annoy everybody. So I don't think that we should play any role of that kind other than what we are saying. In terms of bad and worse choice, I think, yes, I agree that we have no good choices before us, because the West is becoming increasingly our principal partner. But our relations, for the reasons I explained, with Russia remain very vital. And our doors of a dialogue to China have to be kept open, because if those doors are closed, we will lose more margin for maneuver. And the fear that the West has, that India, Russia, and China may somehow resolve their interstate problems and come together, and that will then counter the West's traditional hegemony. Those fears, I think, should be kept alive a little bit from our side by keeping, as I said, the margin for maneuver for ourselves open.
Ambassador, thank you. Over the course of the last week, in anticipation of your talk, there have been some discussions going on. The participants today are primarily residents living in the United States, and our conversations, as we have them with policymakers, seems to be consistent with the lopsided nature of the points that you're making. America demanding that India toe the line in order to be a partner in the world democracy. Two comments that we've heard in spite of what may have been perceived as India not taking the position the United States wants. That the relationship with India is not a transactional relationship. It is an enduring relationship. It is a transformational relationship. The presidency, the Congress, the Senate, state, national security, all have said that answer. But surprisingly, the Department of Defense and the Pentagon has talked favorably in response to the limitation that India poses. Why this dichotomy? Defense understands India's nuances, the rest do not. What do you think is going on?
Well, if you remember, when the CATSA legislation has been passed by the Congress, Mattis, as Defense Secretary, was very proactive in carving out an exemption for India, because the Pentagon understands the challenges on the ground that the United States faces from a power like China. And in that context, India is vital. Point is that if you are going to counter China and going to develop the concept of Indo-Pacific, then you don't have the India part is the Indo part is India. You cannot have a broad-based maritime counter to China unless India is a vital part of the game. Let me explain. At no point in history has any power developed its naval capacities as rapidly as China has done. Today, in terms of numbers, they're larger than the US Navy, not in terms of tonnage and capacity, military capacity, but in terms of numbers. Now, these numbers can't be confined to the South China Sea. I mean, it's a bit of a lake. They'll be sitting ducks. So they have to break through. And where will they break through? Not towards the Pacific. They have to break through to the Indian Ocean, where their vital lines of communication, especially energy supplies and trade routes are. Now, if they enter the Indian Ocean, which is the Navy, which is the country which can actually do burden sharing? And our Prime Minister has said that we are ready for burden sharing. That he described India for the first time a few months ago as a net security provider. This language was never used by us before. So we are willing to be a partner of the United States in the larger endeavor to contain China, and the Pentagon understands that. But the State Department, human rights and all that stuff, you know, every year they have to make a report, then they have to make a report on democracy, and India is not a failing democracy, or not a full democracy, or a partial democracy. All that nonsense that comes from the United States circles, also from the Congress. These are not defense-related issues. These are the so-called values-related issues, which United States uses as instruments to put pressure on other countries. And the State Department is very much part of that. And in the White House, as you know, currently in the White House, especially the Democratic White House, there are a lot of elements who think along these lines. And therefore, you have these conflicting signals. Though I must say, as I understand from official circles, a person like Jake Sullivan has his head on the right shoulders in terms of understanding India's importance. But Blinken falters. Now, where was the need in this joint press conference with our foreign minister to suo moto raise up the issue of human rights in India? When he came to India, he was more careful, where he also said that, you know, democracies are a work in progress. In the United States also, we have to see how our democracy can function better and democracies can talk to each other in a frank manner. But this time in a prepared statement, so gratuitously he raised the issue of human rights violations by government officials, prison officials, and the police. It was a deliberate provocation and intended to send a signal to India that if you are not as amenable to our pressure on Russia and Ukraine, then we can open some front for you. So these are the problems of dealing with a country like United States. It's a sort of democracy, and there are all kinds of views and lobbies and forces at play. There are parts of our own diaspora. You chaps are very positive and good, but a lot of our problems come from the Indian diaspora, in the academic world, especially in the United States. We have a problem in dealing with the United States, but my view is that we should have a realistic view of the United States. We have to accept that these are the undersides of our dealing with the United States, but the bigger picture should be kept in mind, and what we can gain from the United States, we should focus on. And where we have problems, we should see the reality of those problems, try and deal with them as best as we can, and stand up where we must, so that they learn to respect us, but not get upset so much that that the bigger picture gets blurred in our eyes, and then we somehow mishandle the situation, and then do not derive the benefit that which we can derive from a positive, productive relations with the United States.
Thank you, Ambassador Sibal. We firmly believe that the U.S.-India partnership will be one of the glowing partnerships of the 21st century. There are a couple of questions related to China, and there's a couple of questions related to weapons, and I know you spoke about that. The next question will go to Kanwal, followed by Dr. Shampat Savangi. And then, Ambassador, before we get into those questions, I know, just being respectful of time, do we have another 10 to 15 minutes? Wonderful,
sure.
Thank you. Kanwal, please go ahead with your question, followed by Dr. Shampat Savangi.
Thank you.
You rightly called that weaponizing the finance through the sanction is one of the tools getting used. And it may, I see that it may also result into different financial systems, at least more than the current dollar-based. Also see heavily used another tools which are less spoken about. One is that the information in terms of the narrative building, world opinion shaping. This is also a war of information where Russia is in the defensive, or rather there is no narrative from Russia coming out. And the media is particularly controlled by the Western. There is also second I am saying is a weaponizing the technology supply chain. And that probably I see that the question to you is that learning from these two different types of weapons in the world stage, should countries like India proactively learn and have the steps to insulate in future such kind of a conflict from any side? Because if India needs to be independent, India needs to be independent in all these three aspects. So should India be taken, and any steps are taken in that direction?
Thank you.
You see, in fact, the information warfare that has been conducted during the Ukraine conflict by the West has been extraordinarily effective. Extraordinarily effective. You see our own TV channels. They would think that as if it is India's war, as if India is being hurt, and as if Ukraine is a long lost friend, the dearest country that we had in our external relations. There's so much space given to the Ukrainians to abuse, vilify Russia and state their case. Interestingly, this is something which perhaps you may not be fully aware of. I was given to understand that 98% of the Ukrainian MPs speak English. And many of them, if not most of them, are double nationals. In fact, they are Americans. Whereas only 5% of the Duma members in Russia speak English. So there is this mismatch that the Russians are not, do not speak English. Whatever propaganda or information they produce is in Russian. And that has very limited reach. They are producing a lot of information, but it's coming out in Russian. On top of that, RT, their channels, or Sputnik, they have been banned all across the Western world, irrespective of all the talk about freedom of expression and freedom of speech and stuff like that. That's all right to beat countries like India with, but when it comes to their own interests, they do what they have to do. And I'm amazed that they are fearful of Russia Today as a channel, as if news coming from RT is going to be so effective in countering the propaganda that the West has mastered. In fact, NATO has perfected this hybrid warfare, part of which is the information warfare. And you see this effectively on the ground. I understood there are 125 PR agencies in the West who are involved in this. And social media have become very political. And this is a danger for us because the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and all that, the biggest audience after the United States is in India. And government has no control. And they have become highly politicized. So going ahead, we have to worry about these things. At the moment, our relations are good. And they may not deteriorate to the extent that the relations with Russia have deteriorated, but they can always be used as points of pressure on us to change our thinking, to change, to put pressures through our public on the government. And governments have become very sensitive to what appears on the social media. So we have to worry about this too. With regard to technology supply chains, in the case of Russia, Biden himself has said quite openly that we are going to deny them access to certain technologies, which will also affect their military preparedness. And Russia recognizes that they are dependent on certain vital technologies, even for their military preparedness, right apart from their industrial machinery. To what extent China can fill the gap remains to be seen. And it'll take time for them to develop their indigenous technologies. Russia made it a point to say that the Sarmat missile, which they launched a couple of days ago, that it had absolutely no foreign component. So they will reach there in terms of developing the problem is for countries like ours. We are highly dependent on the rest of the world also is on semiconductors. We have this ambition to set up manufacturing of semiconductors in the country, part of our PLI scheme. Let us see whether we can persuade Taiwan or some American companies to set up facilities in India. We are very good at designing semiconductors. We are very good at that. But production, we don't have that capacity. But this is work in progress. And if we have mastered our nuclear technology and our space technology, sooner or later we'll be able to master that. We have to take it in a mission mode and put all our resources in it. And hopefully, we'll produce the results we want.
Thank you, Ambassador Sibal. We will now come back to, I think, what is the last of our two questions. The next question, Dr. Sampath Shivangi. Dr. Shivangi, please go ahead, followed by Dr. Romesh Japra. Sampath, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Good evening, Ambassador. Probably you may recall we met along with Prime Minister Vajpayee in Palace Hotel in New York in 2003, 2004.
Yes, I do.
Yes. First of all, congratulations and thank you for such a wonderful, eloquent speech I heard after so many years. I know you people make India what it is today. Thank you for that. And my question is two-part. One is, where would Russia stand in case of Chinese aggression against India? Of course, it was almost there about 6 months or a year ago. They were at the border of India and they were almost attacked and we lost so many soldiers. Of course, we don't know how many they lost, but if that happens again, where does Russia stand? Because Russia is trying to be closer to China. And if there is the eruption of war between China and India, where you are the Russian expert, I want to know from you, what happened to India? Because the part two question along with that would be, we have a new Armed Services Committee chair, Senator Roger Wicker, who is from Mississippi. He's a very close friend of mine. And I had a talk with him last week for an hour, whether he'll be able to provide the lack of defense equipment coming out of Russia because of post-Ukraine or Ukraine war.
Great question.
Russia will not be in capacity to provide. We value the friendship of Russia very much.
Great question.
Yeah.
Great,
ultimately,
thank you.
We have to see what is good for India. I think why we should just depend upon Russia if you have an avenue to depend on US, part of it, and which we can mobilize and organize. And I just want to know from you because
great question.
Thank you so much.
Great question.
On your first question, Russia will remain neutral, as was the case during the Galwan standoff. However, if you remember, Rajnath Singh rushed to Russia at that time and made some specific requests for expeditious supply of some items that we needed from Russia, especially ammunition, missiles, and other things. I understand that we had 12 items that we wanted, and Russia was ready to supply all of them. And this was at a time when we were facing China on the border. So there'll be no interruption of whatever supplies we need from Russia in order to sustain our military preparedness. But in terms of actually out in the open, getting involved in the conflict on our side, we neither expect Russia to do that, nor will they do it. In fact, it is enough for us if they remain neutral. For that matter, US will not do it either. During the Galwan standoff, current standoff, US was very helpful in terms of intelligence sharing and giving us information directly from the skies, capacities which we lack, about Chinese formations and other required information in terms of space situational awareness and winter clothing. But there's no question that of United States putting boots on the ground against China in Ladakh. There's something which I think I ought to say, which is this, that if you look at Russia's position even on Senkaku Islands, they say that Senkaku Islands fall within the ambit of our defense treaty with Japan. But they say we have not taken any position on the sovereignty of these islands. It's very important. The US does not take any position on sovereignty issues involved in Ladakh. They don't accept our claim line, nor do they accept China's claim line. They want the two sides to sort it out amongst themselves. What, in the case of Japan, what they say is that nothing should be changed by force, which is very different. So there's no question of the United States physically coming to our help, though they will help us indirectly, as Russia would do also indirectly. That is one. The second is that, there are certain things we get from Russia which United States won't give us. After all, we have leased nuclear-propelled submarines from Russia. We're going to lease one more, I understand. They have actually been involved in the development of our own indigenous nuclear-powered submarines, a technology which United States will not share. In terms of our civilian nuclear program, the only country building nuclear power reactors in India is Russia. There are certain other sensitive technologies, even relating to missiles, which I was personally aware of when I was ambassador there, which we can get from Russia, but the United States even today won't give us. So where we find that United States equipment is very good, superior to Russian, and which we can have access to, we will go in for that. And there are a lot of items where US technology is much better. But there are a whole lot of other very sensitive technologies which US will not share with us because there's a congressional process involved also. And if they can't even lift the CATSA sanctions on us, potential sanctions on us, you can imagine the kind of difficulty that we have in dealing with the United States potentially.
That's right. The National Defense Authorization Act every year is a remarkable opportunity, and but that's where we have to flex the opportunities. Dr. Japra, and then we have a brief comment from Richa, and that will be concluding this evening, and then I'll hand it back to Kanwal. So Dr. Japra, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Yogi. Namaskar, Sibalji, for this. We really commend you for this very bold, factual, and eye-opening discussion. My question is a little bit extension of what you discussed earlier between Russia, India, and China. Once the war is over, you think it'll embolden China for its expansion? Of course, wants to take the Taiwan over, and if it doesn't get into countries like Nepal and back into India and many other Pakistan and everything else, you think that will, if you can get into the mindset of China as an expansionist, what do you think? And will that happen, or we have to be prepared for that kind of stuff?
See, so far as Taiwan is concerned, yes, it has certain collateral effects insofar as our security is concerned. Because if China succeeds in incorporating Taiwan, then they have breached the first island chain, and then they can enter the Pacific and the Indian Ocean much more easily. At the moment, they are blocked. I mean, don't forget that China is a semi-landlocked country. The only sea face they have is in the South China Sea, where they have US forces, US bases, US 7th Fleet. So it's not easy for them. They have to break out. And Taiwan is what they can help them break out. But there's a huge risk involved because there is 138 miles or whatever the water between the two, and amphibious operations are extremely difficult. It's not easy for China. But that is essentially a challenge that the United States and Japan and others have to face. India is not involved in that directly. That is one. The other is with regard to Ladakh or India. Let's not exaggerate the Chinese threat. The Chinese threat is there. But at the end of the day, if they get even 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers of barren land up there in Ladakh, how is it a victory? How is it a victory? And at what risk? Because it's not going to be like 1962. We'll have a lot of casualties. They will have a lot of casualties. And their capacity to suffer casualties today is much less than it was at the time of the Korean War. With one China, one child policy, every Chinese is a prince. And if a child dies, the whole lineage disappears. There's no family left. So they're not going to easily tolerate casualties. So they will not take risks beyond a certain point, though they'll continue to pressure us, keep us on the defensive. Pakistan, they will instrumentalize, as they have done in the past, to strategically neutralize India as much as possible, but Pakistan is in a mess. They have lost ground in Sri Lanka. They have lost ground in Maldives. In Bangladesh, they have not been able to penetrate as much as they had hoped for. In Myanmar, they're doing well, but there is resistance. And there, of course, the Americans have contributed to this by sanctioning Myanmar unnecessarily. In Nepal, we have a bit of a problem, but after the departure of Oli, things are a bit better. So we are managing, though the Chinese pressure will remain, but let's not exaggerate the physical threat from China. We are capable of standing up to it. It just is that they are keeping us on the defensive, and they are maintaining a degree of uncertainty. And they're locking down a lot of our armed forces and resources on the border, which is a financial burden on us. But then nations have to go through, for nations to become nations, they have to go through these tribulations and trials. I think it is good for nation building.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador. The last comment, and then we will wrap with this. Richa, I think you had a statement that you wanted to put out there with the hope that if the ambassador wanted, he could provide us comments. Richa, please go ahead.
Thank you, Yogiji and Ambassador Sibal. A wonderful talk and so insightful. I think my comment was largely about the wars that you spoke about, and I wanted more, just your thoughts on it. That U.S. Most of the wars that they fight are largely related to the decoupling from the dollar peg, right? Whether it was the Iraq or the Libyan, or even right now, Russia and China had openly started to subvert the dollar by decoupling from it. So do you think that is going to drive a lot more instability and, in the economy? I think we're already seeing some of those trends. And what do you see as a solution? I mean, a multipolar world and economically as well, or do you see also the rise of the cryptocurrency, or what are the solutions that we are going to see in terms of how the world economy is going to function in the future?
Great question.
Well, that is a very complex question, and in some ways, I'm not in a position to actually adequately answer that, because this cryptocurrency business, India, as you know, has taken a position. Our finance minister was in Washington, currently is in Washington, and she's pointed out the dangers of cryptocurrencies, especially misuse of these currencies for terrorism, for money laundering, and other things. And in any case, no state would like to lose control over fiat currency. So up to a point, cryptocurrencies can be used, but they cannot become the normal exchange between countries. This won't happen. It won't be allowed to happen either. Though Russia, as you know, has not tried to get payment for its exports in cryptocurrencies, but US has announced that they're going to block that too in some ways. I don't know how they're going to do it. I'm not a technical expert. But insofar as moving away from dollar-denominated global system, especially the oil part of it, because that is where the petrodollar thing enables the United States to dominate the financial system of the world. Russia has just announced that they will accept payments only in rubles and not in hard currency, not in dollars. Everybody thinks that Gaddafi was ousted because he wanted a system where he would sell Libyan oil against gold, not against the dollar. Because if that happens, then the domination of the dollar will begin to crumble. And the advantage that the United States today has, because of dollar being the principal reserve currency, that advantage will be lost. So it's a very sensitive matter for the United States, but we are moving towards that. It is true that yuan has not yet taken off as an international currency, though it has been included in the SDRs, but in a very limited way. BRICS have an agenda. US, Russia has very often spoken about the BRIC countries working together to develop an alternative to the dollar and have exchanges in their national currencies. And some of that is already happening. The oil gas trade between China and Russia is in part in national currencies, though it is related to the dollar, but it's still in national currencies. To answer your question, I think in the future, inevitably, after what's happened today with the confiscation of the reserves and everything else, there'll be a great hesitation to put money in the US treasuries beyond a certain point, and to move away from the petrodollars and trade in national currencies. This trend is bound to increase pace. And what we see, and this is my own thinking, I may be wrong, that what the United States has done today is a folly and is the beginning of the erosion of the dollar hegemony.
Great, sir. Ambassador Sibal, thank you very much. This has been a fascinating conversation. As a part of the Foundation for Indian Diaspora Studies, reimagining India and the conversation of putting perspectives is exactly what this was intended to do. And I must thank you for your forthright, your candid conversation, your comments. And I believe that your diplomacy has always been, let's be upfront and center. Let's absolutely ensure that the position and the viewpoint is articulated in a way that is defensible. And I watched you on Twitter. Your positions are extremely thought-provoking and make people think in the context that I think diplomacy must be looked at. I also like to make a quick observation. I think the generation of diplomats and politicians that grew up under the watch of you and many other leaders who have fortified India's position in the world, I must say that India's position in the world is in good hands. I will leave this conversation by saying thank you for all joining us today. This is indicative of the conversations and the dialogue that we want. And the Foundation for Indian Diaspora Studies has one task: to correct the narrative. As Indian Americans living in this country, we have a responsibility and obligation to ensure that as Indian Americans, we can articulate the facts. There's a statement we believe in: people are entitled to their own opinion, but not the facts. And that's what we choose to do through these formats. Thank you very much. And if we were in live presence today, I'm convinced that you would have had a standing ovation. So Ambassador Sibal, I lead with a big thank you for being here today. Thank you so much for being here. And I now hand this back to Khandarao Khan. Thank you, Khandarao ji.
Thanks, Yogi ji. I think you have eloquently summarized the session, and thanks, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal ji. It's a great pleasure to host you second time. We had hosted you along with current NSA Ajit Doval ji in Washington DC on Capitol building. We had a session. It was before this government. It was in 2013. So it was wonderful. It was on PAC region, and a lot of things you had covered during the session. I still remember that came out to be true. We would like to host you in future, and thanks for your maybe in person. That would be a great opportunity. Thanks for staying late and sharing your insights. Thanks, so many dignitaries joined today on this call. So I'm thankful for all of them. With this, we will end the session formally. We will still, as usual, keep the bridge open for some time, as again, this is part of our monthly series of reimagining India on occasion of India at 75. We will be having a next session. We will be announcing soon. So looking forward all of you to join. Again, these are the monthly sessions, but we also have the weekly or bi-weekly on different topics that we will continue. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And well, maybe we'll have a chance to interact again. Thanks a lot.